A little while ago, I made a video about all of the NPCs in Pokemon Legends ZA that got permanently replaced by the wild zones that appear throughout the game. However, many people were kind enough to leave a comment, letting me know that there's a method to clip out of the early game tutorial section and explore the city before all of the wild zones appeared. So for the sake of completion, I decided to give the glitch a try since I was starting my Kentani Become Champion run anyways, and went to the 6 wild zones that spawn in the very beginning of the game to see what was there before. And to my surprise, there were actually some people there. So let's take a look at the first 6 human zones and the NPCs that we never got to meet, plus a little extra fun facts about what happens when you clip out early game. Wild Zone 1 is where we get our first little catching tutorial, and it's the only wild zone to have multiple NPCs still in it along with said Pokemon. All these NPCs appear to be already there before the little road gets turned into a wild zone, and they're giving the very same tips as they do later. However, there's a couple of NPCs that do get deleted. You can see them hanging out in the little fenced park area where the Pichu usually spawns. This pair of rich kids seem to be debating what makes Pokemon Pokemon. The guy thinks that battling is what makes Pokemon, well, Pokemon, although he agrees that keeping them around as companions to love and coddle is also fine. Meanwhile, the lady is on about how Pokemon don't have to battle. It's perfectly fine for them to simply exist as their adorable selves. Not that I don't understand why others might wish to have their Pokemon do battle, of course. This makes me wonder if the game was initially planned to have 2 separate routes, one where you focus on the Battle Royale, and one where you're just hanging out with your Pokemon, although it ended up getting scrapped along with these NPCs, and it kinda makes sense considering how lackluster the benches and cafes are in this game. There is a bit more to Wild Zone that you could typically access, however I cannot reach that area since this pond is blocking the way forward and there's boulders blocking the other entrance. So I have no way of checking the Zone 1 rooftops for potential NPCs. Sadly, even the other nearby rooftops aren't accessible until much later in the game. There may have been a couple of more trainers standing up there where the shiny Mareep spawns, but I guess we'll never know. Up next we have Wild Zone 2, which is just a park. Funny enough, I can even reach this one bouldered area and pick up the item since there's not a wall in the way. Although there's also no people here either. I kinda missed that one guy that's crouching in the grass trying to sneak up on a Badoo. That being said, the strangest part about Human Zone 2 is that it's already supposed to be a wild zone this whole time, since that one ad we see from Quasartico Inc. right when we get to Lumiose City shows an image of this wild zone with borders up and already in place. Then again, they also show the Pokemon Bunnelby as a potential wild Pokemon in that zone, but that's not the case in the final version of the game. One last thing worth mentioning is that Wild Zone 2 is supposed to be Vert Plaza, one of the 5 plazas in Lumiose City. However, it is also the biggest of the 5 plazas since it doubles as a public park and it seems to have expanded a bit beyond the typical circle that the others have. Next we have the other plaza that was already a wild zone, Rouge Plaza, but it's also completely empty. There's no people, there's no Pokemon, however there are briars that are loaded in even before it's become a wild zone. Funny enough, we do also have rooftop access early on, and I feel like the view is a little bit better without the wild zone barriers. I don't know, I like this more. I'm starting to see Ivor's vision of let's just not do wild zones. It looks prettier. Next up we have the cemetery, which becomes Wild Zone 4, and you guessed it, it's completely empty. Just like Wild Zone 3, it also has some environmental barriers already loaded in, but other than that, nothing to see here. Although I gotta say it is kinda nice to just walk through it without getting jumped by angry ghosts, but there was nothing of interest here, just a bunch of dead. These first 4 wild zones were very clearly designed to be wild zones from the very beginning, as they did not have any NPCs loaded in. It makes sense, since we never get the chance to actually go there before the tutorial section of the game is over. And while Zone 1 did delete those 2 rich kids, it may have been the case that their initial location was supposed to be outside of Zone 1, but then the spawn for Pichu got moved away from the rooftop, so those 2 had to go. However, I was very curious about the next 2 zones since they clearly had signs of human activity before the Pokemon invaded. First I went into Wild Zone 5, fully expecting to see some sort of street market, but to my surprise, there was no soul on these streets. The park area was completely empty, the rooftops were clear, even the Alpha Whirlipede area was just vacant. The one interesting thing about this soon-to-be wild zone is that none of its environmental obstacles were loaded in. No briars, no sludge blocking the way. which is weird because they were already loaded in the other soon-to-be wild zones and other parts of town, some of which were blocking access to nearby rooftops that I wanted to check out. Makes me wonder if they were on the fence about making this a human area right off the bat and then converting it to a wild zone, but then decided against it. And with that, I just had one more human zone to check, although my hopes for it were not high at all. But as it turns out, Human Zone 6 was actually full of people that we never got to meet, because this area gets taken over by the Houndoom as soon as we have access to the map. So let's see what these NPCs are. At the entrance we have this gentleman selling bread, but he won't talk to me unless we're super close because that's an early game thing, and I kinda wish I didn't because it's one of those smell people. Next to him is a guy complaining how strong Pokemon can just park it wherever they like, including this street. This other guy is giving a tip about how stronger moves tend to take longer to use. This lady feels on edge walking in town because of all the wild Pokemon, and this guy enjoys circular roads. This old man is foreshadowing all the scary dogs that'll be hiding behind the cars soon, and these two ladies are talking about the need for cars, but also how it's gotten a lot harder to get around with a car. Nearby we see a Furisod girl asking the right question because yes, there are non-callous Pokemon in Lumiose now. Then there's this lady trying to get us to spend money. There's also people at the cafe, but I guess they didn't learn how to sit because we're still in the tutorial section. And unfortunately that means I cannot talk to this other lady since she's too high and mighty. I cannot reach her to trigger the conversation part. Near the cafe there's this guy saying skill issue and the cafe owner is the same as always. There's also some NPCs behind the cafe, but they don't actually get removed since this is outside the wild zone, so back in I go. There's some people gathered near the shopping booth, talking about the importance of items, although I cannot buy any during this section of the game, at least not from this shop owner. Near them is a guy who works as a dictionary, and the backpacker who likes to look around while exploring. He's just like me. There's this kid who's saying something random, but it's okay since he's a kid. And there's this other kid who writes his name on his Pokeballs, that way the ball guy will know it's his. This makes me question how does he know whose balls these are. It's very important because I'm having him hold my Master Ball until I need it. There is a functioning Holovator here, and up on the rooftop there are some rich kids. The lady is on about how you have to heal if you take too many hits, but the guy, he gets my go-goat. He's trying to enjoy the moment while getting pelted by Pidgey apparently, and then says, "Nothing to see here, commoner." Man, I'm glad he got deleted. Although the dialogue does make it sound like there may have been some planned interactions between Pokemon and people inside of the zones themselves. I would have loved to see this guy specifically get attacked by a bunch of Pidgey. Anyways, the nearby rooftops did look kind of empty, but there were a few more people chilling in a somewhat hidden area. This battle girl hopes that martial arts will help her quiet her mind, and these two are talking about how they went into a wild zone but then got swarmed by Pokemon. Ha! Except there's no wild zones at the moment. Anyways, down by the water, we see a lady who misses spending the summer with her Pokemon, and this group of kids having a very interesting conversation. Have you heard that the sewers connect to all kinds of different places in Lumiose? But there's a lot of Pokemon that live in the sewers. Only strong trainers can face them. And of course, some of these sewers have been around for like forever. This is such a lore drop because it confirms that the sewers are a stand-in for the catacombs we were all expecting to see here, but it also hints to the fact that it might have been a much bigger map with multiple different entry points. In fact, some of these small alleyways in this area could have very much have been another potential entry. And this place happens to be very close to the Justice Dojo, which would have tied in well with Gwen's storyline. Overall, the presence of people in Wild Zone 6 makes me believe that this area was not intended to be a wild zone right away, unlike the other 5, but then got converted later in the game's development. Some of the quotes imply that there may have been much more interactions between people and wild Pokemon planned within these wild areas, but they also got scrapped along the way. And the biggest lost content was the fact that the sewers were likely meant to be much bigger, with many more entry points scattered throughout the city. It just never happened. With that, I've covered all of the early game wild zones and the NPCs you can find within them. And while I'm not really a fan of using glitches and would not recommend you try this since it really isn't much of a point, I think it was kinda cool to see all the extra details about the game, which may have been scrapped later in the development cycle. Anywho, if there's anything else you'd like me to document about Pokemon Legends ZA in video form, do let me know in the comments down below. I like doing this stuff, so I'd be happy to make more. And if not, you can look forward to the various character runs that I kinda hinted to in this video, but it probably won't be for a couple of months, so be sure to subscribe. Either way, thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!